Welcome back to another segment of the 3&D podcast. It's your hosts, Rashab and Gabe. And we got a good one today. So we've had a lot of discussions on the past about, old retired people from the 80s and the 90s, some even the early 2000s who like to talk shit about the current NBA players and the way the game is played today. And, the typical, back in my day, I lifted the earth on my back and shoved it to the sun type mentality. So Charles Oakley had an interesting take on Giannis. I use the word interesting. We think it's stupid, but this was the take that he had. So I'll paraphrase here in terms of what Charles Oakley said. He said Giannis was doing his thing. He was skeptical about Giannis before because Giannis couldn't shoot or make a free throw. But then after what he did last year, referring to his playoff run, he said he kind of won me over. Charles Oakley said that about Giannis. But then right after that, he goes on to say, back in my day, he wouldn't have been a force. He would have struggled. They would have made him shoot jump shots. He wouldn't be Euro stepping towards the basket. Somebody would have knocked his head off. I'm paraphrasing here, but that's what he said. And then a couple days later, we had Isaiah Thomas, the OG Isaiah Thomas, who him and Oakley don't necessarily like each other, and they have a history a little bit, but they're not the best of friends. Isaiah Thomas kind of fired back at Charles Oakley, and he said, man, Giannis is going around Oakley. Giannis is going around all of them. He's dunking all of them. He's bigger, he's faster, he's stronger. You can talk all that stuff now because you don't play anymore. You can talk all that stuff because you've got gray hair and you're sitting on the sidelines smoking cigars, talking about what you used to do back in your day. That dude would dog you every single time y'all stepped on the court. Now, you may hit him hard, all right, but after you hit him hard, you ain't got nothing left. You got no game. You got no game. That's what he said. And then he says, everybody needs to stop it. He would dominate in the 80s. We had never seen no dude come into the league like this. And give him his props, give him his credit. He would dog anybody in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and even 30-20 when we get there. So I thought this was hilarious. This was a hilarious, sort of back and forth between two older heads in the basketball community talking about, the back in my day argument. And I think when anybody says anything in back in my day, I would do this, or it was like this, just stop. Humans evolve. Okay, we move forward. We don't move backwards. The athletes of today are, like Isaiah Thomas said, they're bigger, they're faster, they're stronger. Giannis is a physical specimen. There's just no way that Charles Oakley, a guy who averaged 9.7 points per game for his career in over 1,000 games, 9 rebounds per game, couldn't shoot, couldn't pass, couldn't do anything really. His job was to be an enforcer, and he was an enforcer at 6'8", 225 pounds, thinks he can hurt a 6'11", 242-pound Giannis, who's maybe 8%, 9% body fat. Giannis would run roughshod on these guys who think that they could do anything to stop him. It's just foolishness to think that a guy who's as much of a freak as Giannis could be stopped by the likes of someone like Charles Oakley. And you know what? Guys like Charles Oakley, these guys wouldn't even have a job. They wouldn't even make the NBA today. You just can't make the NBA with what they had to offer. Now, the floor of the NBA, in terms of the skill set and the prerequisites required just to make it to the league, is so, it's worlds apart in terms of what the floor was back then. The ceiling, yeah, it's similar. The top end talent, the greats of them, they're probably going to be greats today too. But the floor, it's not even a question that the guys who played in the NBA in the 80s and 90s, who couldn't dribble with their offhand, who didn't know how to do a behind the back dribble, there's no chance that those guys survive or even make the NBA in today's day and age. And Charles Oakley's talking about Giannis being a bench player. You have a 2-time MVP being a bench player. Charles Oakley wouldn't even be in the league, let alone Giannis being a bench player. Let's stop with this foolishness. This is just, it's ridiculous. I don't even know what to say. You go ahead. I can't. I can't.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail. I'm thinking we're aligned definitely with our thoughts on how Giannis compares versus Oakley. And to be completely honest with you, I had to do my research to see what Charles Oakley even did in the NBA, because all I know him for is really getting kicked out of the Knicks arena with those issues with Dolan. So, yeah, you hit it. He's 9.7 points per game average, 9.5 rebounds. And even looking at his best season, he averaged 14 and 13 while playing alongside with Michael Jordan. So essentially all the attention would have been at him, and Charles Oakley would have had plenty of space in the paint to do whatever he wanted to. Yeah, so not really an amazing career. You touched that he's 6'8", 225. That really doesn't compare to Giannis' 6'11", 242. And that's Giannis now. Obviously, he was much thinner back then. And, back then probably Charles Oakley could have actually taken his head off. But I think the real touching point here is they always revert back to my era this, my era that, if he came back here. Well, let's take a look at Giannis's career. Like his first season, he's as a 19-year-old, he would average 7 points a game, going up to 12.7, going up to 16.9. And in those years, he would average about 1-3 a game, slightly more. But what he's shown is his ability to be able to adapt. And now he's really worked and crafted on his game to where the point he's taking roughly almost 4 threes a game. And it's not necessarily saying that he's a good 3-point shooter, but he's shown the ability that he can change his game to really fit into today's era. So if you're going to say that he is adaptable, which I think he is, I think he could easily go back into the 90s and play. Now, he's got the size. He's borderline 7-footer, 240. Now, he's obviously not like Shaq caliber or anything like that. But to say that his skill set wouldn't let his game translate to be successful there, I think that's pretty delusional. And yeah, like Charles Oakley in his career, what was he? He was a trade piece most of his career. He was never a focal point on any real team.
I mean, at best he was a starter in his prime, but as a role player, I think for the New York Knicks is where he had like his prime career, his prime years of his career.
So. Yeah, and that's the Knicks. He was in a big market. Like imagine he had those stats playing in Indiana.
Yeah,
he was even more irrelevant than what he is now. But like just saying that Giannis couldn't compete in that era back then, it's pretty like these guys never give the stars the benefit of the doubt in today's game. Like say for example Michael Jordan, every time the common thing in the media is like, what's Michael Jordan's weakness? And somebody like Nick Wright will bring up, oh, it's the 3-pointers, and then they'll come out back with, oh, but they didn't shoot the 3 back then. If they did, Jordan would have been a great 3-point shooter. And that's just Jordan's a great player, arguably the GOAT, and they're giving him the benefit of the doubt. Like, okay, he would have been able to translate and adapt in this era. Where it's for Giannis, it's like, oh, no, look at him. He does this now, definitely could not do this in the 90s. Even though physically he can compete with them. He has the metrics. Like, I don't know. I just think it's really... They just lack the thinking. It's delusion, yeah.
It's just stupidity. Like, Charles Oakley, I mentioned, he was a starter in the prime of his career for the Knicks. And his best averages, I think you said, were like 14 points per game or something. Like,
yep.
Giannis is averaging 30, 11, and 6, and he's been doing that for like the last 3-4 years now, as a bona fide MVP candidate year in, year out. And you think that's the guy that's coming off the bench, but you, as a 14-point per game starter who literally can't do anything, is starting? That just doesn't make sense.
That's the thing. If Giannis is coming off the bench, he's essentially saying the entire league in the NBA is barely fit to be a bench player. If the MVP of, the last couple of years is a bench player.
It's blasphemy, and I cannot. I don't know. I think Steve Kerr said this in an interview a couple of years ago when every year you have the media guys asking the current players, or like a guy like Steve Kerr is a great person to ask. They always ask this to Phil Jackson too, someone who was in both eras, like Steve Kerr as a player for the Bulls playing with Michael Jordan, kind of saw that era, and then he coached his way into this era, and now he has some elite. He's coached, your Steph Curry, your Kevin Durant. He's coached the elite players of this era, and he said it best. He said exactly what we're saying. Like, humans evolve forward. Science gets better. Diets get better. Guys today are stronger. They're faster. They care more about their body. They have more resources to care about their body. Like, it just doesn't work in a way where a guy like Charles Oakley can come around and say, oh yeah, and Charles Oakley, by the way, I already said this, his role in the NBA, just like a lot of other big men back then, their roles in the NBA were enforcers. They were either there to protect the guards, or they were there to set hard screens, or they were there to rebound. That was the job. That was the prerequisite requirement to make it to the NBA if you were 6'10", or 6'8", or 6'9", and you were 225, 230, 240 pounds or more. The big men of today, your Giannis's of today, your Joel Embiid's, these guys are not any smaller in size, but they are worlds apart in skill. So for a guy like Charles Oakley to talk smack about today's generation and say, oh, well, back in our day, it was like this, or we would hammer you and lay you out. Yeah, Giannis is going to go around you, first of all, and his physicality is better than yours. Don't forget that when you're saying you could be more physical with him, that also means he could be more physical with you. And he's the stronger guy. He would adapt and use his physicality more then than he's able to now because the rules would allow it.
Well, this is the thing. You also mentioned that the floor is much higher. And if we want to look at Giannis from a work ethics perspective, you could see like how much his body has changed just to be where he's at in his NBA career. And Isaiah Thomas said it. It's like, oh, you old heads are just like smoking cigars, talking about back in my day. Well, like even in the '90s, these guys would, if you want to like take the Last Dance documentary as an example, yeah, we'd crush beers at halftime in the locker room. Like, does that scream great work ethic or that they're keeping their body in the absolute best shape they can? Versus people nowadays, like you've seen like the LeBron diets, like Tom Brady diets, stuff like that. Like they take nutrition to a whole new level compared to in the past because you know what? The floor is really increasing. So in order to be the best you can be, you have to really like reach your ceiling at all levels. And like part of that's nutrition, it's work ethic. And I guess the other major thing is that the game has changed. Like you mentioned Charles Oakley was an enforcer. Like now, even all sports, it's more skill based. Like if you want to look at hockey, like they're really taking out fighting. Those enforcer guys are really irrelevant because there is no more fighting. So if they don't need to enforce anymore, what really do they bring to the table? What do they provide? Like Charles Oakley can't shoot, can't do anything. He's pretty much irrelevant. And that's you saying that, well, okay, the product is worse now, which I don't believe that because then, the NBA wouldn't be as successful as it is today if the product is much worse now than it is then.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, I don't want to see an enforcer. I want to see 5 guys on the court for each team that are skilled and can do everything. And that's what the game has transitioned towards. Like, it just, I cannot wrap my head around the way these guys, these older retired players talk. And I have to give Isaiah Thomas credit, the OG Isaiah Thomas. Like he's never been shy to say, the players today are more advanced, or guys like Steve Kerr who are openly admitting, like, look, the league now is better than it's ever been. There's just no question about it. And then you always have your guys like Charles Oakley who want to come in and try to critique the players of today unknowingly. Like it's almost, ignorance that, dude, the guy's weighs 20 pounds on you. He's lower body fat, more muscle. Like you do realize that's going to work in his favor, right? Not in your favor, regardless of what you're trying to do. So I don't know. I can't. It's just blasphemy to me, and oh my god, it makes. I don't.
Even with Charles Oakley, like who else was around, let's say 6'8" at that weight, like a modern day player? Like let's say Kevin Love, for example, a guy who
Yeah,
would on a small market average like he'd had a 30-30 game at one point. 20 rebounds was a regular thing for him. Being in a mid 20 point per game scorer was also a thing for him. And even he's had to like transition his game to play in this level of NBA. And I think he's a far more skilled and better player than Kevin Love or than Charles Oakley ever was.
agreed. Agreed.
Like, and he's this guy's shooting like for like a guy who's already won MVP, saying, "Oh, he's not on my level." Like, has Charles Oakley ever been an All Star?
Nope. I don't think he's ever been an All Star. I don't think so. As far as I know, he hasn't. So it's a terrible take. And some of these old guys, and I'm sure we'll get into this in different
It's great
episodes as well,
TV.
but some of these old guys, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. They're delusional. They're lost. They're stuck in their old time and their old glory, and they're not ready to give it all up. So it is what it is.